Hello, welcome back to painting class. Today we're going to talk about something pretty exciting and crucial when it comes to developing your painting tool belt, and that is space. And I'm meaning atmosphere, how we achieve depth in our paintings. So today we're going to talk about is why this is different than this, or even this. So let's get started. Okay. So if we're going to talk about space, we need to talk about how to use our tools to create this illusion of depth when we're working with painting and drawing. So I think the best way to do that is to start with talking about drawing. So in drawing, we create depth by using a few rules of thumb. The first one is that objects always get smaller as they get farther away. And there's a visual logic to capture that I'll go over in the next slide, where you marry the horizon line with your vanishing point to create perspective. The second thing you need to know is that in order to push an object back in space, you need to have an object overlap it to tell the viewer's eye that that object is in front. Third thing is that objects always get smaller, lighter, and less detailed as they get further away. And the last thing you need to know is that your position in space, your eye, your perception, has a relationship to the objects that you're trying to depict. So the three things we need to know about using linear perspective to create an illusion of depth are the horizon line, the vanishing point, and perspective itself. So the horizon line is the line that is the end of the earth that your objects organize themselves around. So if your object, like this tree on the right, is taller than the horizon line, then it's going to recede towards the horizon line sloping down. And if it's lower than the horizon line, such as with these train tracks, it's going to go up towards the horizon line. And they go towards the vanishing point, the point that's where it's so far away your eye can't see it anymore. And these two things work together, as I said, to create perspective. So here's an example of that perspective in action. This line of trees, the tops of the trees you can see perfectly slope down in a straight line towards this edge. It also happens here on the left. And it happens most commonly with structures like a house, these geometric structures. It also happens with the train tracks. And if you keep going, you get Spider-Man. Just kidding. Anyways, space. So now that we have a basic understanding of the rules of thumb that we use to create space, let's look at some paintings that do a great job of this. So obviously we have this painting here where we have light and color with our figures in the foreground, but we also have the moon very far away and the trees really far and small and lighter as we get towards the horizon line on the middle right. Other paintings will use scale as a big element in how they create space. So this painting might read a lot differently if we didn't have these three figures in front here, but they're here very small next to this big tree to let us know that this is the foreground and in the background is this small house. And then beyond that's the horizon with these large swooping clouds. Other paintings use this understanding of depth and space to give a sense of grandeur to the landscape. So we've got, again, our small figures here, a big tree, and then in the background, these roaring waterfall-type cliffs. And we also notice we're starting to get some atmosphere here. There's a sort of a warm air around the hills and the deep background. That's because the further away we get, the more atmosphere there is. That's why things get lighter as they recede in space. You can also maintain a sense of style while depicting space in your work. So here's two Japanese block print style pieces by the same artist that use fog and atmosphere and a lack of details to let us know that there are trees back there are mountains back there, but that they're receding in space. They're far away. The things that are crisp, most detailed are the things that are closest to us. And you can take that idea and really push it to make a very maximalist style painting with lots of little details. So we've got this whole hunting scene on the bottom left with all of these crisply rendered huntsmen and dogs. And then in the middle ground there, you have all of these really small ant-sized folks. And then the really far back way of this painting, you can see the rest of the settlement type structures. Also, we can think about how atmosphere and how our horizon line, how high or low we put the horizon line, can help us understand what we want the viewer to look at. So with the atmosphere, do we want them to look at what's through the fog, or do we want to push that back and have them focus on what's in the foreground? But also, if you put the horizon line higher up, you're telling your viewer, okay, the thing you need to focus on is what is given more space. And in that case, this is the ocean. Whereas if we put it lower, then you'll tell your viewer, okay, look at the sky. So this is another high horizon line piece. So you can see that we're supposed to be looking at this lake scene that's closest to us with these ripples in the waves, these flat areas versus these texture ones that tell us maybe how deep the water is or not. And if we keep going down, we can see, oh, okay, I think we need to pay more attention to the sky because the horizon line is lower, there's more space for the sky, and there's some dynamic clouds happening. And you can really push that with scenes like this, where you're using color and light and space together to really give a dynamic sense of this vast rolling plains type space with this small structure in the back. Here's just another example of that. Here's a whole society of people out on the beach, it looks like. And we have a really pulled back color palette. We've got these big, swoopy clouds on a foggy day. This reminds me of London. Oh, speaking of London and of industry, if you can also put the point of view of the picture plane, which is our eye, our position as the viewer in space, if we put it low, then these buildings are going to look very tall. But if we're on top of a hill and the structures are in a scene below, like we were with the Huntsman piece, then that tells us that adds one more thing for the viewer to grab onto in terms of context for the artwork. And this also applies to modern work. So here's a couple of street scenes from an artist that does paintings about San Francisco. And we can see that the fogginess and the rain and the hustle and bustle of the cars and the way the lights glitter on the sidewalk and the way that the structures recede in space all tell us a lot about the architecture and about where we are in relation to the depth of this scene. And the greats, the big names in art history, do this as well. Here's a Monet piece, here's a Seurat piece, here's even an Edvard Munch piece. This isn't The Scream, but it's another one he did from the same date and time where you're using this linear perspective of this hand railing to tell us that it's going far back in space with these smaller figures behind. And lastly, here's just a scene of an industrial landscape, which you don't see that much, but I wanted to point this out again because it does all the things that we want to be doing and thinking about. We have crisper details in the front, the scaffolding and the levels are getting smaller, lighter, less detailed, and foggier as they get further away. Ooh, and this is a Magritte painting that I just had to show because it's so cheeky. It's a landscape painting of a landscape, but the actual whole painting is a portrait orientation. So that's just a way of being a meme lord as a painter. So let's talk about Bob Ross, because Bob Ross is the master of creating an illusion of depth. So in every painting he does, he works back to front. He works lightest colors in the back, which is to say foggier, more atmospheric. And then he layers on until he gets to the foreground with the nicest, grittiest details. So let's take it tableau by tableau, blow by blow, one at a time. So he lays in background, lays it in, puts in just the hint of some hills, and then goes over that with some darker ones. That tells us he A, overlaps it, and then B, makes them darker to tell us this is coming forward, this is closer to you, there's less atmosphere. Then he goes into the next level and starts putting in a tree line, and he completes the tree line, and it goes over even the last layer. And then in front of the tree line, he locks that into place by giving us some white slashes telling us, okay, now there's a lake here. And then he gets really wild because he'll go in and ruin, or potentially ruin, all the work he's done by putting a very bold, dark tree in the middle of the composition. He layers it all the way down and then is able to cement it in space and anchor it to the picture plane by adding in these details and telling us where the light falls on the tree and giving form and texture to the tree. and then putting something even in front of that. So he's even pushing that tree back with some foliage, and now he's pushing the foliage back with some more water line. And then he'll come in at the end and goes, okay, now the things that are closest to us, here's all these bushes, here's another tree. And you might think, okay, you did it, Bob, you're done. Please stop stressing me out with all these wild moves. Don't try to do anything else. And he says, hold my beer, we're going in again. He'll put in another giant tree. And it goes all the way off the top of the picture plane down to the bottom. And you might think, oh my God, Bob, you're going to ruin it. But no, he does his move again of putting in more strokes and slashes to tell us, no, it's actually a very green tree. And here's some bushes in front of it. And ta-da, you have a finished painting with the last details at the end being the little twigs and such with the smallest brushes. And then boom, he's done it. Classic Bob. So let's review how to achieve depth in our paintings and drawings. The first thing is to work back to front, just like Bob. Second thing is the further away it is, the lighter it's going to be. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about how atmosphere plays a role in creating depth. The next thing is that the closer it is to you, the more detailed it is. And conversely, the further away it is, the less detailed it's going to be. And you also need to know that overlapping objects create depth. And the last thing is that the objects get smaller and closer as they recede in space. So we learn that in linear perspective. All right, so with all that in mind, it's officially demo time. I didn't do one last time, so I feel obligated to do one this time. It's always a bit of a risk though, because painting in real time might turn out like a big heap of painted garbage, which is not what I'm going for. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, I'm thinking that for this demo to show you space, we're going to pick a horizon line, I think 2/3 up, and then we'll focus more on what's here. So first thing I'm going to do, block in a sky, because again, we work back to front with acrylics. So let's work back to front. You know, in my opinion, for sky color, I kind of like ultramarine. Some people prefer phthalo blue. And phthalo blue is great, but not today. So I'm just going to pour a little paint. And we're going to get going. Here's the thing. This is a demo, so I'm going to go fast and loose. And if this doesn't turn out beautifully, you're not allowed to get mad at me. Here we go. Okay. Here. Now the thing with painting atmosphere is as we get closer to outer space, the atmosphere gets darker. So closest to the horizon line will be the lightest, and the further away it gets, the darkest it'll be. So I'm going to load up a little bit of blue. And now since this is already wet, I'm going to work wet into wet. This way. And I'm working across so I have even strokes so that it will blend evenly. That's how you get a smooth gradient. Back across. Try to get something more or less consistent. Even pressure. Yeah, that's good. I could go, sure. You want to do one more? Let's risk it all at the very beginning. Yeah, just keep working this in so we have more or less a gradient. I think that's good. So now, let's put in, oh, I don't know, maybe a muddy brown ground, or maybe a muddy green. And I'm supposed to be mixing on the palette, but I'm just going to mix on my sponge. Let's see how this goes. So, whoop, immediately ground. Sky, ground. Easy, right? Let's go again. Let's even do some silly little hill moves. Making sure that there's no white canvas anywhere. And as we get closer, we'll get a bit more gruff and rough. Burp, burp, burp. It's just more fun if you do sound effects with it. So, okay, boom, sky, ground. Let's put some clouds in, shall we? I'm just gonna take some white and put it on here like this. Now this is out of the tube, and you never want to apply white straight out of the tube unless you're blending into something, because once you go whitest white, you can't go back. So we want to work within the spectrum of color and not go to the extreme. So wet into wet, this is gonna turn blue. But I'm just gonna mark out where my clouds are. What do we think? Small clouds, big clouds? Let's do like a honkin' like Studio Ghibli cloud, and we'll do circles, little circles. We're not gonna mix too much. I keep almost getting it where I want it. Sure, fine. Yeah, all right. And then how about another one over here, coming down out of the freaking, yeah. Yep, okay. Now I could spend all day going back in there and putting in shadows, because with clouds you're always pushing back and pulling forward and pushing back again. But I don't want to draw my viewers' attention here too much because the clouds are far away and I want them to focus on what's here. But I want them to know this is a skyscape more or less. So here's a loose cloudscape. Now I'm going to use this little number, and it's almost long enough. You can hear it. Oh, what do I want to do? Do I want to put anything of note in here? I've already got kind of a pleasing scene happening. I think let's see if we can't get away with just a couple mid-ground things to set the scene before I go in here. So let me just kind of use the tooth of my brush to suggest something going on in the mid. And then more slashy closer we get. So, ooh, okay, something's happening. Now, maybe it's time for the big moment. Now, I'm going to have a shape in here that goes past the horizon line to tell you it's firmly in front. So, we talked about perspective, so I'm going to have to adhere to that. So, let's see if we can't do something a little like this. Ooh. Okay. You know, these demos are always really fun for me because I don't plan them out. I have a vague idea in my head of what I want to be doing. And at this moment, I'm wondering also with you what this is gonna be. Okay, yeah. Now this is getting a little muddy, but that's okay, because I can always do a second layer. Maybe I'll come in, oh, where is it? Put in some rummaging sounds here. Just kidding, you don't have to. I'll just actually rummage. You know, you prep and you prep, and then when the chips are down, you still can't find any of your palette knives. Oh, here's one. Let's pull some of this out. Ooh! What's happening here? Look at that. You know, there's some fun stuff you can do while the paint's still wet. In fact, it's still wet everywhere. Everything on the canvas is still wet, which is exciting because that means I get to do this kind of Yeah, good. Woo! Should we put in like a just a little shadow in here, but with less pressure. Okay. And now maybe, so okay, what? Let's put some shadows in under this thing. Let's say we have a light source coming from down there. So we'll say here. In here, we're going to ground a shadow. Sure. And then it'll also be in here. But where? Like there? Now we're going to do some out of the tube red because it's going to be a fish head painting. Surprised? I don't think so. Fish head's here. And in fact, maybe the whole head should just be a fish. Yeah, okay. If you've watched my other videos about composition, you'll know that I've talked about why the diagonal is a useful compositional framing device. Okay, so just with like 1 or 2 moves, I've now transformed this thing into something that we're all asking ourselves, what's that going to be, Cooper? So let's find out. I'm going to go down a brush. No, that's too small. I'm going to go down 1 to this brush. And, you know, first though, let's put an eye on this fish head. There we go. Okay. Eye on the fish. Oh, but before we put the eye on the fish head, let's do some more scales. So again, mixing on the brush. The skin that we have, we're going to do some like peeling off moves. We're going to start over here and then come in like it's been peeling off. And we're going to go super light pressure, barely even touching the brush until we kind of get there. Like the skin's just kind of falling off of it. And maybe we'll do one over here like it's catching the light. Yeah, like that. There you go. There we go. Now we're pushing that red back. And we'll even do one here. And we're relying on the tooth of our brush, the texture of the brush to kind of drive that effect home. I'm going to pull this down a little bit. That was too light for me. So we'll pop it back in there. Yes? Okay. Now I'm going to really quickly just use what's called a fan brush. And it's only for real fans of painting. Just kidding. It looks like this. And Bob Ross uses it for trees. We are going to use it to dab in some fish scales. Just using some white and some matte medium and just a little bit of color from our palette that we've already mixed on. Ooh, look at this. All of a sudden, I just saw it from across the room. I'm like, what is that? Anyways, so I'm just kind of like tapping it on. So that your eye can start to be like, okay, there's like a lot of layers happening with this texture. Right? Now we've got more body. And now I'm just going to go in with some white. A little pink. So now we're going to give some accents to this flesh. If the flesh catches the light a little bit, then that's interesting too, and we want to know what that's looking like. Here? Here. Ooh, yeah, that's gummy. That's pink. Yep. Okay. Yeah, what a big soupy fish mess rotting on the swamp. Okay. Now let's draw the viewer's eye towards the fish's eye. To do that, we're going to give the most amount of details to the eye so that your eye, we tell our viewer's eye what to focus on. So if I go in like this, pop in some color for this eye. And I'm being very generous with my brush. And then I go in with my dark color. We're going to just plop in an eye in the middle. Bloop, bigger, bloop, bigger, rounder. Sure, good enough. I might even go in with a little darker too. My light's coming this way, so the most light will be over here, and the thing shielding the light from the iris will be a little darker. So we'll pop that in. That helps tell our eye that light's coming over here. And then, I'll put in a little highlight yellow for the eye to make it more dynamic. But the thing with fish eyes is that fish are dead. So the eyes dry out. And when the eyes dry out, they don't have that reflective little white dot. And that's like the whole thing that makes an eye look alive. When I see a painting and the eye doesn't have the little dot, I'm like, what is that, a wax figure? So we're going to slash on some of that and slash on some of that. Oh, we're going to make it rounder though. Rounder, rounder, round it. There it is. And I'm going to plop on that little dot so that you can see how that really is going to transform this into letting our viewer know that actually this fish is alive and has feelings and a family, and his name was Frank, and it lived in Liverpool. And now you're eating it. So this is my vegetarian rant for the day. Okay. And you know what? Observe. Ta-da. So, what have we learned? We've learned a horizon line can help you tell your viewer where you want them to look, right? If the horizon line is higher, you want them to look at the land. If it's lower, you want them to look at the grandeur of the sky. We know that objects overlapping other objects push them back in space. That's why I had the fish head go over the horizon line to really tell your eye this fish is in front and to give it a more dynamic sense of space. And we know that the things closer to us have more details. So I've got all these slashes and swoops and swirls with my brushes for the fish, but the environment has less so, and especially the further we get back. So light, color, and space all come together to make dynamic images. I hope this was useful to you, and I hope you had fun watching, and I hope you're inspired to make your own painting. If you find any time to make your own painting, send it to me. Support the channel. So that's all for today. Class dismissed.